समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Lined up along the entrance to the Kissa Khwani Bazaar, machine guns protruding from the turrets of the 50 horsepower Vickers Crosley M25 armored cars behind them. The soldiers of the Royal Garhwal Rifles stood under the searing April sun, weathering an unceasing shower of abuse and human excrement from the balconies of the merchants' homes on either side of the street. That St. George's Day, April the 23rd, 1930, local police had arrived in the bazaar to arrest the Pashtun nationalist leader Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. Khan's red-shirted Khudai Khidmatgar volunteers had blocked the police's path and slashed the tires of their trucks. Finally, the official history records, I quote, the sub-inspector in charge had to accept the prisoner's suggestion that they should get down from the lorry and proceed to the jail, escorted by the crowd. The crowd remained in control of the bazaar though, and the army and their armoured cars were called in. Then a blow from an axe killed Private Harold Bryant, who jumped out of his armoured car for reasons we don't know, and one of the armoured cars exploded in flames. Lacking clear orders, Captain S.J. King ordered the machine gunners to open fire. The crowd, which had been estimated to be 1,500 in the main street, an officer of the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry wrote, disappeared like magic, leaving numerous corpses on the ground. Last month, after the Central Reserve Police Force used pump-action shotguns firing birdshot as well as electric cattle prods against students in Delhi, a long overdue debate has begun on when it's legitimate for law and enforcement to use force against protesters and what weapons ought to be permitted. The record of Indian policing is pretty grim. Kashmir saw 117 protesters shot dead by police in 2010, another 85 in 2016, and 55 in 2018, according to classified police data obtained by ThePrint. Less lethal birdshot, which is designed for use in sports like skeet shooting, was introduced from 2016 in an effort to mitigate the awful toll of life in Kashmir, but ended up claiming the eyesight of several hundred young people. Former Intelligence Bureau officer Yashovardhan Azad has now joined with two individuals injured in Delhi to demand a complete ban on the use of birdshot. A demand, by the way, that's been made for many years by medical professionals across the world. The Supreme Court had in 2017 declined to ban the use of shotguns in Kashmir, but only because then Attorney General Mukul Rohatgi claimed other technologies had been ineffective. The court was told by Rohatgi that the government was working on, I quote, a secret weapon to disperse crowds. What's happened to that secret weapon? Who knows? The problem goes far deeper than tech though. The shotgun is a symptom, it's not the malaise. For the most part, police forces across India control to use a crowd control vocabulary that would have been pretty familiar to the soldiers in the Kissa Khwani Bazaar almost 100 years ago. It's full of phrases like minimum force, proportionate response, but as you'll see, it's not very clear what these things actually mean in practice. Led by young men armed with lathis perched on their shoulders like rifles, Hindus and Muslims had spilled out of the grounds around the Badshahi Mosque in Lahore, cheerfully proclaiming that the Emperor, King George V, was dead. Why they said that, I don't know, but they were having a lot of fun while they said it. And they named themselves an army, they called themselves the Danda Fauj, and they marched on Lahore's fort, where they, I quote, spat on the British soldiers on guard and called them white pigs. The Danda Fauj then made its way to the railway station, urged the workers there to go on strike. Large numbers of posters were also put up on the walls of Lahore by April 20th, 1919. That's just heading up to the tragic climax of the uprising at Jallianwala Bagh, calling in the name of Mahatma Gandhi on the people of Punjab to enlist in this new army, the Danda Fauj, and kill the Angrez. Finally, the Danda Fauj was confronted by the police in the famous Lahore sex workers district, Hira Mandi, by the district magistrate and a detachment of police. And this time, a weapon was used on them. Yes, the pump-action shotgun firing buckshot. The fact that, and I'm quoting now, the fact that the police armed with buckshot were made to take the brunt of the collision with the crowd instead of the troops with service ammunition, the small number of shots fired by the police, and the warnings given by the crowd showed, in the opinion of the committee, that the greatest care was taken and the least possible degree of force was used. The official investigation of the violence recorded. The official investigation was, of course, a colonial investigation, and I'm guessing most Indians at the time had another opinion on this matter. For colonial administrators, you see, terror was the central tool for the maintenance of order. Egypt's cities had a standard riot drill just like India's, where they had canes, clubs, and bludgeons against protesters, followed by birdshot. And when the birdshot didn't work, they brought in Lewis machine guns, which were frequently used in the countryside against Bedouins, sometimes together with, believe it or not, airstrikes. Tactics were similar in India. Air power was routinely used against civilians in India too. In 1923, the bombing of villages in North Waziristan claimed 50 lives and numbers of livestock. And following Jallianwala Bagh, though we don't talk about it very often, the town of Gujranwala, now in Punjab, was strafed by the Royal Air Force. 5 regiments of British cavalry, 21 British infantry battalions, 15 active and 32 training Indian infantry battalions, 8 sections of armoured cars, and numerous artillery, engineer and pioneer units all made up the British Indian Army in 1920, historian Simeon Schul reminds us. But what were they there for? Not to repel an external invader. They were there to repel Indians from claiming their national freedom. Problem colonial administrators refused to learn was evident in Kissa Khwani. Terror just didn't work. The armoured vehicles brought into the bazaar were surrounded by crowds who refused to move. Bryant, who jumped out of the first armoured car to clear the path, was killed after he waved his gun at a protester. Now, we don't know, as I said, exactly what happened, but quite possibly somebody threw a stone or slashed him with a knife after he threatened them with his pistol. The armoured car braked sharply after this, and the second one ploughed into it. Fuel leaking from the accident caught fire. On purpose or otherwise, again we don't know. And even though the machine gun fire directed at the crowd killed large numbers of people, 20 according to official accounts, more than 125 according to an investigation by the Indian National Congress, the Khudai Khidmatgars ruled Peshawar for the next several days. The Raj remained at war with the Pashtuns throughout the northwest frontier province until it eventually went back to Britain. Lessons were sadly not learnt in post-colonial India either. The political scientist David Bailey, writing in 1971, noted that policing remained, I quote, overwhelmingly colonial in its mindset. There was little willingness to engage with communities and demonstrate accountability to the public. For the most part, policing remained simply a coercive enterprise concerned with the use of force to enforce public order, whether it was insurgencies, protests, or anything else. Through the first decades of the new millennium, the use of firearms against protesters, we know from official data, became increasingly common. The scholar Sonal Marwa has demonstrated that large-scale caste violence that tore across Rajasthan in 2007 led to the loss of at least 37 lives, mostly of protesters, adding to 26 the previous year. 32 people were killed in 2017 after police opened fire on supporters of the cult leader Gurmeet Ram Rahim Singh, who rioted after their guru was convicted of rape. Even though successive governments have promised to address the use of excessive force by police, there's been a lack of seriousness about this. For one thing, figures released by the National Crime Records Bureau are sadly simply not credible. The NCRB's data for killings of civilian protesters by police for 2024, which were finally published earlier this summer, asserts that not a single person was killed and just 2 injured in lathi charges and police firing. That in a year when there was ethnic violence across Manipur, communal violence trended sharply upwards, and farmer protests swept the country. There's little data either on the circumstances which led to the decision to use force, and even less on how many deaths and injuries, and how deaths and injuries might have been avoided. There's a deeper cognitive problem here. Our constitution guarantees Indians the right to protest, but it also gives the police vast powers to disperse illegal assemblies. And who decides whether an assembly is illegal? Basically, an officer exercising his discretion. There's no well laid out benchmark. Lethal force across the world is clearly used only when there is an imminent danger to human life. There is no other circumstance in which it can be countenanced. London's police force, you'll recall, allowed mobs to burn and loot property in 2011, knowing that the perpetrators could later be arrested and prosecuted. From the many learnings government should be taking away from the student protests in Delhi, this one is key. Treating Indians as subjects who can be beaten up at will is unsustainable. The right to protest needs to exist not just as a constitutional abstraction that's there as a guarantee, but as part of the lived experience of societies. And if you treat people like animals, they will probably respond like animals. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.